One of the things I failed to mention 2 weeks ago, and that Daryl Davis also neglected to explain, is that nature abhors a vacuum. What does that have to do with any of this, right? Well, think about it this way. If the unknown is an absence of knowledge and understanding, a void, then most of us will instinctively move to fill that void with beliefs that either alleviate our fear or trigger more powerful emotions like anger, hatred, and zeal. So in order to talk about fear and hatred and all the things that we've been talking about last couple weeks, we also need to understand that belief plays a major role in all of this. Beliefs arise as a reaction to fear, but beliefs can also create a lot of fear in our lives. And in fact, I would argue that the majority of the fears that plague us, the 4 that I listed last week, I would argue that those are all based and rooted in beliefs. So once again, spiritual exploration is an important tool in these times as well, especially if you're experiencing anger and hatred or just straight up terror, constant anxiety. If you're feeling these things, those emotions are connected to thoughts and beliefs. And so if you can follow them back to their source, you might be able to change it and, find a better belief to take its place. Because again, can't have a vacuum. Nobody that I know can live without beliefs. Even the person who says, I have no beliefs, is expressing a belief. Some people like to say, oh, it's not a belief, it's an observation. Well, I have bad news for you, my friend. Observations are silent. And the moment you put words to your observation, it is no longer an observation. It is a statement. And a statement is an opinion and a belief. So you can't get away from this. All you can do is be aware of it and carefully audit and select your beliefs in a deliberate manner instead of just letting them kind of grow haphazardly. When I talk about the real pandemic, the fear pandemic, it's important to distinguish between 2 types of fear. The way that I distinguish between these 2 types of fear is to consider one functional and the other one conceptual. So functional fear is something that is actually quite good for us. It's useful. It helps us stay alive, and it's a trait that we share with almost all other living organisms. The vast majority of living organisms have this fear-based response, what we sometimes call the fight or flight reaction. Now, this kind of functional fear is, like I said, very useful, and you can distinguish it from conceptual fear by looking at what triggers its appearance in yourself or in other people. Functional fear is a reaction to immediate, clear, and present danger. Something is happening right now, or it's coming up in like a few seconds and you can see it coming, right? Like you're walking down the street late at night and somebody pulls a gun on you and says, run the jewels. The reaction that you're going to experience there is functional fear. It's fear in the face of clear, present, immediate danger. That's not what I'm talking about when I am referring to the real pandemic. When I say that fear is the source of our dysfunction, I am not talking about functional fear. The type of fear that I'm talking about is rooted in beliefs. It's the kind of fear that arises out of false, irrational, and unhelpful beliefs. We're not dealing with something that is tangible, like I said, a clear, present, immediate danger. We're talking about something conceptual and abstract that causes us to feel fear. One of the best ways to distinguish between functional fear and conceptual fear is to look at the timeline. Is the thing that is causing you to be afraid in the past, in the future, or in the immediate present? If it's in the immediate present, you're dealing with functional fear. It means that there's something there happening right now, in reality, in your environment, and it's a problem. And that fear response is supposed to help you get out of it alive and unscathed. If your fear is rooted in something that happened before or something that may or may not happen in the future, you can be pretty confident that this is an example of conceptual fear. Not always, because sometimes you will see ahead and you will detect a threat, or a danger looming in the distance, right? You know that if you don't change something in the present, eventually you're going to get to this problematic thing in the future. that fear response, though it is still conceptual, it's still rooted in the future, which doesn't exist anywhere else but the present. Even though it is partially conceptual, it's rooted in reality, right? So like, for example, if I was unemployed and I was going through my savings, and I know that in basically, like, I don't know, say 2 months, I'm going to be completely flat broke. I won't be able to pay the rent. I won't be able to pay the bills. That's a conceptual fear that is rooted in something real and functional, because you know that if you don't get a job, you don't pay the bills, eventually you're going to be on the street, and that is a threat to your safety and your survival. So it's not black and white. As you know, nothing is. It's all shades of gray, but it is helpful to try to build sometimes more simplistic dichotomies, and I think the dichotomy of functional fear versus conceptual fear is very useful. As I said, the fear pandemic is rooted in beliefs. It's rooted in not just beliefs, but a certain type of belief. Beliefs that don't represent or align with the way things actually are. And so sometimes we create these beliefs as a way to alleviate fear. It's a comforting lie maybe, or a comforting misconception that we convince ourselves of so that we feel good. We're no longer afraid. And other times, the belief actually gives rise to fear. The majority of the beliefs that cause us this fear are not explicit. They're not beliefs that we verbalize to ourselves or to others. They're deeper underneath the surface. They tend to be the sort of assumptions and the definitions that we take for granted, and that also influence all of our conscious, explicit beliefs. These beliefs are not always easy to detect or identify, which is why I always am promoting this notion of spiritual exploration, of questioning yourself and challenging the things that you find during that process. Thanks for watching this episode of The Outsider's Perspective. If you're interested in spiritual exploration, in examining your own story and challenging it to see where it holds up and where it crumbles to dust, you can check out my series on that topic. I put a link in the comments below. The series represents my first attempt to kind of encapsulate the process of spiritual exploration as I see it. It's not meant to be a, authoritative look at the topic. And in fact, I think there are many different ways to engage in spiritual exploration. My friend Grego has his way of doing it and his sort of ideas around it. And I think it's important for each person, each explorer, to develop his or her own methods and sort of, systems, if you will. In sharing my, series on spiritual exploration, I'm just trying to give you some ideas, maybe give you a blueprint, or at least a starting position from which you can kind of develop your own thing. And of course, my entire system is not something that I created or invented myself either, and I try to give credit where it's due, but I just pieced it together, borrowed it from various sources, and there's nothing wrong with doing that either. Check out the series on spiritual exploration, and I will catch you next week. Until then, live well, my friends.